Hey, Joanna.
Hi, Mike.
So we've talked through the preparation, and we're now going to look at phase one of the negotiation itself. So we call this the opening phase. And this is literally in the negotiation when you have the counterpart in front of you, and it's the beginning phase of that negotiation. So there's quite a lot of key factors that we want to include here. So I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look through those.
Great. So let's start with the beginning. What makes sense for me uh, to be the beginning is the written agenda. But tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we absolutely advise to firstly to give an agenda and set an agenda. And there's many reasons for that. I'll highlight a couple. But when it's written, it has the most impact. Firstly, it's the easiest to remember. And secondly, when you have it written, so for example, written on a flip chart or written in the chat box of a Zoom call, you can refer back to it. That's one of the key benefits of an agenda is it kind of makes sure that all of the points are followed in order. If somebody wants to jump ahead to a point, you can say, thank you, that's point four, and we'll get to it when we get to it. But it's so important firstly that it's written, but primarily that you set an agenda. Without an agenda, you're kind of you have no control over it. And what we really want is a strong chairperson who has control over the flow of the negotiation. So a written agenda is an absolutely lovely, lovely thing to have.
Great. Um, are you sending this agenda by email beforehand, or are you just putting it on a flip chart, or what is the ideal situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It entirely depends on the situation. Uh, to send it in advance means that you are telling them what to prepare for.
Mm.
So, in a negotiation, when you're working with a counterpart and you have this mutual goal, then absolutely it's a great benefit to give them the agenda, show them the points that you're going to be talking through so that they can consider their side as well. I'd say that's an excellent practice. It's not absolutely mandatory, but there will be a benefit to it. What you want to be careful about is if there are going to be any significant issues, if there are points that you really need to dive into that you may disagree on and it may take time to figure out, you want to be careful about putting that in an email beforehand because what you're creating then is an anticipation of a fight. So you want to be mindful of that if you are going to include an issue or a problem in the pre-mail agenda. What you could do is just put a kind of brief kind of bullet point that doesn't necessarily go into much detail about the content of that particular topic, but it is there so you can move through it when you have the negotiation meeting.
Okay. How about setting the scene?
Setting the scene, that's a great question. Well, as we mentioned, the negotiation that we're talking about here, this is not market bartering, and this is certainly not a win-lose. This is a win-win negotiation. This is strategic partnership, long-term agreement, long-term collaboration, hopefully is what we're going to get out of this negotiation. So setting the scene means creating a positive atmosphere. And there's several ways in which we can do that. And I'll highlight just a couple more points on this slide right now to mention that. Firstly, you see down the bottom right, past successes. So if you are already collaborating with them, if you're already done things together that have worked out well, absolutely put those on the table in the opening stage because you're creating that atmosphere. You're showing them that you're already trusted partners. Why ignore that and why not highlight that when it's already the case and it can already give you a benefit and a boost moving into this negotiation? And the second one I really want to highlight is the common ground. This is in the hit list, as we mentioned in the previous video. and you've got to establish the common ground. It's absolutely fundamental because it is ultimately the reason you're there, the reason the counterpart is there, the reason you're taking this time to reach this agreement, because there's something that you can do together that is amazing that you cannot do, certainly not to the same standard, without each other. So setting the scene by building common ground, by talking about past successes is absolutely fundamental.
Mhm. Great. Um, Another one that I'm really curious about is the small talk.
Okay, yeah. So many people, they would say that, well, small talk is not necessary. It's fluff. It's not achieving anything. But I think we would definitely disagree with that because ultimately you're people. You're a person with your personality and your life, and your counterpart is exactly the same as that. So what is the small talk doing? It's showing that human side, and it's showing and building a connection that goes slightly further than just a business relationship. And it's a very human thing. It's a very natural thing to do. And if you don't do it, you miss it. This is absolutely the truth. If you go into a meeting and it's straight into the topic, no small talk, no kind of rapport building, you feel it not being there. So we really would recommend, as long as time allows it, and as long as it's naturally occurring, then small talk is absolutely necessary at the beginning of the meeting. Yeah, for sure.
I have to say I agree with that. I think it changes the whole scene. Usually it just brings some sort of connection to the table, and any kind of connection is welcome in a negotiation. Um, and what I see here is also written common ground. So we have built common ground and written common ground. What is the link there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, written common ground. Well, it's kind of the same as the agenda. When you have a written agenda, you can refer back to it. It's clearer, it sticks in people's minds, and if they lose it, then you can say, well, look, here's the agenda. This is where we are, and this is where we're going. With the written common ground, it's exactly the same thing. If you have it written somewhere, if you put it in the chat box or you write it, often we advise to write it as the title for the meeting or the title for the agenda, then it's visible. And everything you do, every discussion you have, every proposal you make, you can underline it with that common ground. So you can say, this is why we're doing it, and this is how this proposal takes us one step closer to that common ground. When it's not written, it can be forgotten.
Mm, great. And so personal introductions and company presentations from both sides. I'm assuming these go together, more or less.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So personal introductions is quite an obvious one. Of course, if you don't know the people, if you haven't met them before, then you need to make sure that introductions are done so they understand who you are and your role as well. We'll look at roles a little bit later on. But it's common courtesy. Again, it's very natural, but you want to make sure that introductions are covered, especially if there's anybody new or if any roles or positions have changed. And then company presentations, yes. Well, presentations are often not necessary. They're certainly not mandatory, but if you have a presentation, if there's a product you want to present or a concept that you want to get them on board with, and it requires a presentation, then that should come, of course, in the opening stage as well. And it's very possible that the your counterpart will have a presentation that they also want to share. So presentations definitely, if they are a part of the negotiation, should come in the opening phase.
Okay. How about agreeing to the process, the storyboard, and the agenda? Okay, what can you tell me about this one?
Yeah, so this is a very simple one. This is purely you've created the agenda, you've created the flow and the schedule for this meeting. Do they agree to it? Get their kind of verbal agreement to say yes, we're happy to go ahead with this process. You should also, of course, mention to them that if they have any additional agenda points to add themselves, then they should advise you at the beginning, to make sure that they feel a part of this collaborative negotiation process. So, yeah, do they agree to the process? Are they happy with the agenda? That's really important. And just to jump to one additional point there, you see right in the middle, have you addressed any big changes? So this could quite possibly be agenda point number one. If you do have a current agreement, a current relationship, and something has changed, then addressing it in the opening phase and bringing that out and putting it on the table already is a really, really good thing to do. Otherwise, the other side are likely just going to do that anyway.
Okay. And how about handling objections? And what does no answers yet mean?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, first objections handled. Well, it's very possible that they'll, if you have an existing agreement with them, or if they've seen something through the sales process or anything like that that they're not 100% on, then they may well bring that in very early on in the discussion because they want it to be heard, and maybe they feel as though this will be the stumbling block that stops the whole agreement going ahead. But when you receive an objection, when somebody raises an issue, you want to follow the objection handling technique. So, have you handled that objection well? And what that means is, did you listen to it? Did you use active listening? Did you ask additional questions to understand it? But what you'll see in the final point here, you don't necessarily have to answer it yet. And in fact, we would advise in terms of answers, what we're really talking about here is proposals. Do not make proposals in the opening stage because anything you agree here is very likely to cause you issues later on. You might already agree to the one thing that your counterpart has come into this negotiation to achieve. And if you have, good luck getting anything that you want out of it if you've already given them what they wanted straight away. So if they have an objection, then handle it using active listening, but don't go directly into here is the absolute solution to that. That comes later in the process.